Today we are going to be talking about dementia, the people who live with it, and their caregivers. There are almost 100 types of known dementias. The most common dementia is Alzheimer's disease, named after Dr. Alois Alzheimer, and accounts for 64% of all dementias in Canadians. For our case study, we will be interviewing Ken, whose stepmother, Sally, was diagnosed with Lewey Bodies, named after Dr. Frederick H. Lewey, MD, the neurologist who worked in Dr. Alzheimer's lab. Our case study will start with Ken telling us about Sally's story and the effect that dementia had on her and her husband Jim, who was her primary caregiver. Our case study will conclude with a short Q&A session to answer some follow-up questions.
After my mom passed away, my dad reunited with Sally. She was his first girlfriend when they were teenagers, and in 2007, they were married. Now, at first, no one noticed anything wrong with Sally. They were both in their mid-60s, so forgetting the occasional name or something like that really wasn't that big of a deal. But as time passed, Sally's forgetfulness got a lot worse. I remember sitting at the kitchen table and she asked my dad if he knew how much the neighbor was selling his house for. Well, my dad told her, and she said, well, he's not going to get that much for it because the roof is leaking. Then Sally asked my dad if he knew how much the neighbor was selling his house for. My dad and I exchanged a confused look, but he didn't say anything. He just told her the price again. And once again, she said, well, he'll never get that much because the roof leaks. And then she just continued to have a normal conversation without any repeated questions. Now, both my dad and I thought that was kind of weird, but figured, she probably just had a lot on her mind. But the next day, she asked my dad if he knew how much the neighbor was selling his house for. And once again, that was followed by commenting about a leaky roof, and then back to a normal, everyday conversation. But this went on for several days in a row. I started to notice little things that seemed off about Sally. Items would suddenly go missing, or Sally would be looking in cupboards and tearing the house apart trying to find something. But if I asked her, what are you looking for, she would have this blank look on her face. And then she would quickly look around and just rhyme something off that was right in front of her. I always got the impression that it wasn't what she was actually looking for, it was just the first thing she saw. Other times she would be vacuuming the floor, then she'd put the vacuum away, and walk out into the kitchen, then come back in, take the vacuum out, and then vacuum the same floor again. And more than once I would put the kettle on to make a cup of tea, and she would unplug the kettle and put my cup in the sink. And when I asked her, why do you keep unplugging the kettle? She denied it and said she never touched the kettle. I took my dad aside and I asked him, just how bad is Sally really getting? Because something's not right. Of course, he was in denial that anything could be wrong because Sally was in perfect health physically. She was always very active. She was doing gardening and going for walks. So he just wrote it off as her being absent-minded. Sally's condition, even though we didn't know what it was at the time, started to decline even more. My sister was visiting from Ontario, and on the day that she was leaving to go back home, Sally accused her of stealing her hairdryer. So my sister had to unpack all of her luggage just to show Sally that she didn't have her hairdryer. So my sister searched the entire house and eventually she found it under the bed. Sally accused my sister of hiding it. But when she asked Sally, what makes you think I would hide your hairdryer? Sally immediately denied ever saying anything about a hairdryer and then quickly changed the subject. I wish I could say that was the worst of it, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. My dad would take Sally for a drive, and when he stopped at an intersection, Sally would just open the door and walk away. Well, my dad couldn't leave the truck in the middle of the intersection, so he had to try to pull it off to the side, then head back on foot to try and find her. And when he finally caught up with her, she not only denied getting out of the truck, she would blame him for getting to pick her up, so she had to start walking home. And more than once, Sally would jump out of the truck in the middle of an intersection. And that's kind of when my dad knew that it was more than just being forgetful. In the spring of 2010, Sally was diagnosed with Lewey Bodies dementia. The doctor recommended that she be put in a facility, but my dad wasn't having any part of that. Now, he took a vow to be with her through the good times and the bad, in sickness and in health. And there was no way he was going to abandon her now that she needed him the most. So he took her home, and he took care of her the best that he could. It wasn't uncommon for Sally to be looking out the window and tell my dad to go out and deal with the kids because they're destroying her garden. And at first he would tell her, there's no kids out there. But that would make matters worse and cause an argument. I reminded him that to her, the people that she sees, they're really there. And telling her that she's wrong will only confuse her. So the best thing to do is to just play along. Well, my dad did all the cooking, and Sally would set the table. So one day she put out an extra 2 plates. And when my dad asked her who the extra 2 plates are for, Sally told him it was for Mary Rose and Hannah, my mother and grandmother, both of whom had passed away several years ago. But to Sally, those 2 ladies were sitting at the kitchen table, having a conversation, waiting for supper. And just when you think it couldn't possibly get any worse, it did. Memory problems, hallucinations, that was nothing compared to what happened next. Sally became more aggressive, and that aggression turned to violence. She would wake up in the middle of the night screaming because some stranger was in her bed, and she would run to the kitchen, grab a large butcher knife, and chase my father out of the house. This happened several times. My dad did everything he could to take care of her and protect her, but it became painfully obvious that there was no way he could continue living like this. In the summer of 2010, he had no choice but to put her in a facility. And for the next 6 years, my father would visit her every day at the Cove, sometimes twice a day. My sister and I visited her as often as we could, and seeing Sally decline from a free spirit and independent woman who loved to paint and sing and do gardening and going for walks to someone who needed help feeding herself, that was heartbreaking. And as her brain deteriorated, Sally forgot how to walk and she was confined to a wheelchair. Sometimes she didn't even recognize her own children. Eventually, she forgot how to eat. And on March 3rd, 2016, Sally lost her battle to dementia.
What sorts of things did your family do to try and help Sally remember who she used to be before the disease?
We didn't really try to make her remember things. I think asking her if she remembers this or if she remembers that would be too confusing and a bit frustrating. If she got stuck on a name or something like that, we just filled in the blanks for her and continued the conversation as if nothing happened. For the most part, we never treated her any different than how we treated her before she got sick.
Did you notice any signs of depression?
I asked my dad if she ever got depressed, and he said she didn't. I think the only time she showed any signs of depression was when she was in the Cove and she wanted to go back home with my dad. Over and over he had to tell her that she had to wait until she got better and then she could come home. He knew she never would, but he never told her that. He always told her to just focus on getting better so she could come home.
You mentioned that there were little things that were wrong, but she wasn't diagnosed until 2010. Were there any other behavioral changes?
Sometimes Sally would do things that were out of character for her. One example I can think of is my sister showed Sally the watch that she bought our dad for his birthday. Then later that day, when my dad and Sally came home from the mall, he was showing off the brand new watch that Sally bought him for his birthday. Well, my sister was obviously quite upset, but once again, Sally denied ever knowing that my sister showed her a watch.
What did you think was wrong before Sally was diagnosed with Lewey Bodies?
In the beginning, all the signs that she was showing had to do with her memory. Forgetting where she put things, forgetting entire conversations and things like that. So We thought she was getting Alzheimer's.
So you mentioned that your dad refused to place her in a facility. Did he have any help from home care services?
My dad never bothered with home care. When Sally got sick, his entire life revolved around looking after her and keeping her safe. I think part of him knew it was only a matter of time before she had to go into a home. So until that time came, he wanted to enjoy as much time together with her as he could.
Do you know if there are anyone else in Sally's family who suffers from Lewey Bodies or any other dementia?
As far as we know, Sally's the only one in her family who had dementia.
Margie and I would like to take this time to thank Ken and his father Jim for all of their help and information on this project. It is greatly appreciated.